Hello. Hi. I'm back with another video. And today I found some great inspiration. And I guess I want to start this one a little bit tongue in cheek, saying that in life there's something to be said for beating the competition to the punch. And this video lightly touches on opportunity. So I'm going to take the opportunity to make the first video maybe of the season referencing Christmas and Santa Claus. Um, just because today I saw someone that looked a little bit like Santa Claus, like he was like an older guy, like maybe in his like uh, uh, like late 50s, early 60s, and he kind of had that a little bit of that white beard, and he was kind of like a security guy, just kind of like leaning back and relaxed, but he looked a little bit like, they say making his list and checking it twice, almost like Santa Claus had eyes on us, to decide what we're gonna receive for Christmas. And I think I've mentioned some really universally cool people on this channel so far. But I think old Saint Nick might take the he might take first place on that. And I think that as a rule of thumb, all of us should be more and more like Mr. and Mrs. Claus to whatever extent we can, because they are universally beloved and they have the power to bestow joy on people. But I'm getting a little bit carried away with that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, almost to talk about Santa Claus in a way, and say that like we hear stories about Santa Claus watching us throughout the year when we don't know he's watching us, and then forming and being able to give us the things that we really long for, based on our conduct in very small things when we don't know that we're being watched. And I think there's something that can be there's something that can be taken from that in a lot of ways. And then before I get really deep into this, I wanted to say that this I'm have, as like I had said a couple of times, I'm building the airplane of this channel as I fly it, and I'm forming a concept of where I'd like to go with the content. And so basically, I just want to say that I'm trying to form like a broad base and foundation to inspire other people personally and creatively, in many walks of life, in disciplines, but more specifically for the craft of songwriting on this channel. But I think some of the lessons and insights can be translated and applied in different directions. But I say as much to say that I plan to come with more content that is geared towards music and musicality, more so from what I can provide of insight would just be some of the demonstrations of original music that I plan to upload and share, in combination with maybe some skills and techniques that I'm picking up, both within songwriting and playing guitar, as much as I can express from my personal experience without without plagiarizing or re-engineering other educational tools. But then to that extent, to that vein, to just simply bring up the subject and make people aware of different resources that might be available to develop in the craft of musicianship and songwriting, like with regard to books and platforms that I might be aware of and introduce. And if people are aware of other resources and would like to leave them in the comments, I think I could gain from that, and other people viewing this channel could gain from that. So just kind of like making this channel as like a broad landing platform or launch pad for different people that are interested in songwriting to maybe land upon this at some point and take value from it. So I say as much to say that I'm planning to come with more technical and hard hitting content in terms of music and songwriting. But then with that, I'm trying to also provide insights and angles of looking at ourselves and our developing as human beings, that can play into and inform our artistry, but just taking a very broad angle and reflecting upon ideas and insights that might not seem on the surface like they have anything to do with songwriting, but can, with inspiration, I think be tied into and give a person versatility and a broad um, uh, a broad perspective of what it can mean to be creative and a songwriter. But what I wanted to talk about today was like kind of like with old Saint Nick and receiving, because a lot of times, you know, we we have we do different things that are both recognized and not recognized, that are I would say inspirational and decent and upright and kind, and we may not always understand exactly how we receive any kind of benefit from the genuine gestures and deeds that we exude in our life. But what I want to suggest is that and just like Saint Nick being aware of what we're doing and making his list and checking it twice. um, you know, like we think about self improving in some field, like whether artistically, technically with an instrument, or just personally in terms of like viewing content, like self development, or looking for different modes of healing, like whether that be like therapy, or books, or retreats and stuff like that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how the orator that I mentioned a couple of times, Osho, he mentions in one of his discourses that a lot of the progress that we make, not only progress, but a lot of the events that transpire in our life are kind of like jumps, more so like rapid jumping, where we can make quite a bit of progress in a very we can almost make like these instant jumps, rather than yes, a lot of things are a process and kind of drawn out, and I want to talk about that a little bit in this video. But at the same time, a lot of our progress and experiences are kind of like rapid explosions and jumps. And I want to say that in your life, many times there opportunity doesn't always look like opportunity, and and that's a little bit of like where I was going with Saint Nick, being aware of what we're making his list and checking it twice. And sometimes very, very mundane and ordinary experiences can actually be catalysts and opportunities for tremendous growth, if we approach it with a certain, if we frame it, because we can always frame our experiences different ways. And if we frame things and approach things from a certain attitude, we can get immense value out of very mundane and ordinary experiences. And where I was kind of going with that is like I want to, with respectfully, I want to make a couple references to military lifestyles and military experiences. Now, I don't have a military background per se. But I have been in proximity and personally known different professional soldiers and people involved in the military life, and I've reflected a little bit about like what training means, and I've always had an appreciation for training, just like in like a lot of times like in different job settings, like a lot of people try to like get through the training videos really quick, but I always had a real keen interest in training videos, because I always felt like training makes a person stronger and more effective in anything they're doing. So I always had a unique appreciation for training of different kinds. But you think about like the way that professional soldiers are trained, and you know, on the one hand, like in I think like a professional sense, like a lot of our I'm speaking as an American, like the United States military, I think they have like they have very um uh developed in training methods that come from a history, and that can simulate and give a person skills that they can use in serious situations. But then you think about like different parts of the world and different periods of history where sometimes people who were involved in military lifestyles or experiences, they may not have had the benefit of a um a a a well designed or a thought out training regiment that would give them specific skills, and they are thrust into these situations without any, maybe without any prior training or skill, as brutal as that might sound, but they are actually in a sense trained by the situation itself. Another I had watched a documentary about something taking place in the Middle East within the last 10 years, and it was showing how some conscripts in another part of another region of the world were thrust into combat situations with very little, if any, training, and as mu- as um, as macabre and unfair as that might sound, it appeared to me that there might actually be a certain benefit in that, in being trained by the actual intense situation itself, as one of the most effective forms of training if a person could survive that learning curve. And again, I offer that with respect and not coming from any kind of military background or service. But what I wanted to say is that when we think about, like, a lot of us have experienced maybe trauma in our life, and we want to find ways to grow and heal from that. And what I want to suggest is that sometimes the another I'm trying to think where I picked this up. I think it might have been Nicholas Taleb, and I greatly apologize if I'm this is not my original idea, but I'm not entirely sure where I picked it up. I think it was Nicholas Taleb, but I read somewhere that in life we actually receive the test before we receive the lesson. Like in school, a lot of times, and where I was talking about with like certain trainings, a person might receive the lesson first and then be thrust into a test of some kind. But a lot of times in the reality of life, we're actually thrust into the test in the trying situation before we are able to come to any understanding of it, or form lessons or reflect upon it. Um, so what I wanted to say is that potentially sometimes the circumstances that are transpiring in our lives naturally and organically can be the most effective modes of both training, healing, growth, and development, as being the real life, just being trained by life itself. An example of that is kind of like, I think I've referenced in the past, like, analogies to different martial arts films, where like a highly skilled, competent master of sorts is portrayed. And I was talking a little bit about some of the aloofness of those masters that are portrayed, and the imparting of skill by the very curtness and almost rudeness as a challenge that spurs a devotee or an initiate to engagement and growth by the nature of the challenge that is imparted by the teacher. But I want to say, um, with that, sometimes these masters in these films, or these portrayals, give the initiate or disciple a very kind of odd, or very odd training that might not seem on the surface like it has anything to do with what they're being trained of. However, it is very effective in teaching certain skills or understandings. An example of that is like the famous karate movie, like Wax On, Wax Off, where there, I think I haven't seen the film, but it's a famous it's a famous uh, it's a famous scene where this young person that wants to learn martial arts or karate is being trained in martial arts or karate by in a very unseemly manner, by like polishing a car or something, but yet effectively gaining a skill. And so what I want to say is that many things in our life, like with healing and different things that we're into, if we're genuinely interested in going and moving in a certain direction, there are circumstances that transpire in our lives that are completely natural and organic, yet can be very effective in imparting a certain skill or lesson, which is where I wanted to go with this. Was something I experienced today in the greater message of this video. Um, Another thing I had mentioned in another video about the value of bilingualism, and I think bilingualism is valuable in a social sense, is for as far as developing confidence, facility with language, and being able to build rapport with other people. But bilingualism is also very helpful in education in different senses and understanding. Um, when I was so the the when I was a young person, I became interested in spirituality. I won't say what path I took, but when I was in a certain uh, uh, a certain school of thought, I was starting to experience things, and very strong positive things, that were a little bit even more personal than some of the lessons I was being taught. Like some of the lessons I was being taught are almost a little bit like more general, but they started to become real, and I started to uh, experience and fathom things that it was kind of, I guess, it's a little bit hard to calibrate and keep it cool. But then later, I was exposed to like teachings from the East, and like that author Avalon that I often mention, and in a lot of his books, he heavily references terms from Sanskrit, which is like one of the ancient languages of the earth, that is from the region of India, and that a lot of our words in English derive from that Sanskrit. Um, but that Sanskrit has a vocabulary for a lot of things. Uh, uh, Spirit, both the it has a vocabulary for things pertaining to our physical body, like realities and subtleties of our physical body, but also dimensions of spirituality within ourselves, and like higher planes of thought. And like one word example is like the word, I think it's Dhyana, and it's like it refers to like a form of contemplation and meditation that is kind of like sublime and profound, that is a little bit different than our regular mode of thought. And then I don't think I'm completely doing justice to that word, but just to say that other languages, and in this case Sanskrit, they actually have a vocabulary for a lot of things that we experience, but we may not be able to lay a finger on it and articulate it. I think it's been said that certain Native American tribes, like the Eskimos, have different words for snow, and they can communicate and articulate subtleties of snow a lot more effective than we can in the English language. And then on the other side of that is that I read somewhere, I'm trying to remember what book it was, but I had read in a book that was talking about the author Homer, who had written like the Odyssey, and they were saying in that book that at the time that book was written, they didn't have a lot of words for color. I think it might have. I apologize. I can't quite quote the source on that. But there is a book, and it's not my original thought, that mentions that the the people that Homer came from did not have as many designations for color. So they referred to many things as like wine blue sea or something like that, where there was a limitation as far as color within that language. But one word the reason I bring that up is because there's a beautiful word in Sanskrit that I want to introduce with this video that it appears a lot in the works of author Avalon, and it's called sadhana, Sadhana, and it's a very beautiful concept and term for anyone who is interested in developing themselves in any capacity. And an outcome of sadhana. So sadhana is like it's like a quest that a person undergoes. It's like an all-encompassing quest and challenge that spurs a person to further development, but it also challenges that person along that path. And the outcome is that person has certain it brings out certain propensities and abilities that are latent within a human being, but because of that challenge and quest, those abilities are crystallized and brought to bear, where a person can command them in the form of what's called a siddhi. I think it's Siddhi, which are a siddhi is like for lack of a better word, a power or an ability that a person has as a consequence of undergoing sadhana. And so I think there are specific. There's a classification of specific siddhis in a spiritual sense that can be garnered from a path to develop spiritually. And and according to author Avalon, one of the chief and the most sublime siddhis that a person can develop and cultivate within themselves is the cultivation of an equitable disposition, and that amounts to not harming anyone or anything, just a completely equitable and kind disposition as one of the highest attainments of a human being. Uh, and so one of the highest things that a human being can attain is a equitable and kind disposition. And to that extent, I think that and I had talked a little bit about military persons in this video, and you know, I think a lot of us, if you've ever met a person of a military background, in a public setting, there's a certain presence that I think a military person has, that can be recognized. And if a person is from a military background, they can usually, I think they can recognize that person as being a military person. But then just a general layman person, for lack of, I don't mean that with any disrespect, but just a general person that is not associated or affiliated with any type of military background, can appreciate and recognize a certain self possession and bearing that a person of a military background commands almost effortlessly in a situation where you can imagine if you were like waiting around like in a Greyhound station, like you know a lot of times you might be in a Greyhound station and you see like and people have to really they're really called upon to wait for a drawn out period, and you know you see people uh, sleeping under chairs, or like the real discipline of a person kind of becomes apparent when people are forced to wait. And you might see a person that really kind of holds themselves with a certain kind of dignity and respect that's unusual, and also a patience and just a certain presence that's unique as a and that can be uh, derived from their military experiences and backgrounds. And I want to say point out that one thing that's interesting is that you know the word kinetic, I think that means like moving and mobile. And it's hard to imagine anything more kinetic than like a military person or a combatant in some type of a conflict theater. But at the same time, there are a few things that are more calm and poised than a military person. And what I want to say is that you know, like when you meet a person that has like a really impressive bearing, like just their calmness, or their patience and their self possession, like from a military background. A lot of times, I think that some of that is not necessarily from their the physical things that the physical exploits that they've done, or the different uh, the different things that they've had to overcome in an active situation. But I think it's equally from some of the sheer boredom that's involved in a military life. I had a friend in high school, I'm sorry, in college, who had returned from a military service, and one time he communicated in a very uh, deep way, just how boring some of his experiences were in the military, like having to wait for long periods of time, being uncertain and bored at the same time, like scared, uncertain, and bored at the same time. If you can imagine what that would feel like. But I think that something about going through drawn out periods of having to wait, do, but to do so with dignity and posture, really cultivates a certain power and patience in a person that's profound. So what I meant as much to say is that today I found myself in a situation where I was waiting in a medical area, and I had to wait for like maybe like 6 or 7 hours, and some people were getting frustrated and so forth. But I was thinking to myself that, you know, if a person can, and I also there was also a person there that looked like Santa Claus, but if a person can, you know, this experience transpired where I'm being challenged to wait patiently for a drawn out period. And I think that if a person can be in such a setting and be I had a book with me which was very helpful. I had a very interesting book, a book that I've actually cited on this channel before, the book about yoga, and uh, by um, I the book about yoga that I cited in another video, and but to go through this long drawn out period patiently, with self respect, with respect for there were some small children running around and playing and getting a little bit wild. but just being respectful for all the people in the waiting room. And then at one point, someone came out from the from some of the nurses came out and they said that there had been some serious emergencies that were going to force the wait to be even longer. So people who had already been waiting about 4 or 5 hours were asked to wait an additional at least another 2 hours. For me, it was only about another half hour. But um, what I meant to say is that this situation, and then also in doing so, when you're in a situation like that where you are being forced to wait for a long time, uh, the people that are serving you, like the nurses and so forth, they're also being challenged greatly because they're having to meet all their normal duties, but then they're also having to interface and serve with people who are being forced to wait. So that brings out another degree of patience and service in them on top of their duties. But you, as a person waiting there, if you can cultivate patience and uh, um, understanding for the situation that's playing out, but also for these people that are serving you, and you can, and when they're maybe expecting you to be a little bit impatient or rude by the situation, when you can be gracious and very kind and gentle, or maybe even humorous, and lift them up. That's very powerful for them, but also for you to see yourself doing that. And so, what I want to say is that this situation, this real life situation that's playing out, might be actually be a great opportunity for you to grow and develop as a person on so many levels, and actually attain a degree of that word siddhi, and an ability and potence within yourself in terms of patience. And then that very patience and equipoise can equally be translated into kinetic or active activities in the future, because there's a relationship between patience and activity, where they kind of it's like a paradox where they can both exist together. So if you can develop your patience, you can also develop your ability to be kinetic and move, I believe. So this is just one. I'm taking some liberties with this video, and I'm also referencing some very heavy, serious subject matter with respect to military lifestyles and persons. And so I offer that with respect and only for the purposes of teaching this example of how some of the real skills and the impressive aspects of ourselves are cultivated from very mundane and ordinary circumstances, but these can be actually real opportunities to grow as a person on so many levels, and that can play into artistry or almost any discipline or self improvement that a person is interested in. So I just want to say, recognize these very strange and ordinary and mundane opportunities that may exist around you, but that can turn into explosive growth and development if you approach it a from a from a certain attitude and vantage point. But I hope that can be valuable to someone. That was just some inspiration that was on my heart today. So I offer this with humility and esteem and encouragement for for creativity and responsible decisions and lifestyles. And to all people viewing this here and hereafter, I say keep up the work.